0607 hours. Caribbean Sea, 180 nautical miles north of the Venezuelan coastline. The water below was flat, deep blue, and giving nothing away. Commander Mark Keller was 3 hours into a routine intelligence surveillance profile aboard a P-8A Poseidon, tracking a Russian-flagged cargo vessel moving along a heading that suggested it was not delivering agricultural equipment. Then, the electronic warfare officer's panel went red. A single tone cut through the cockpit audio. Radar warning receiver. Lock. Bearing 170. The signature resolved in under a second. S-band fire control emissions, spectral characteristics consistent with the Buck M2E engagement radar. Someone on the Venezuelan coast had not just detected the Poseidon. They had locked onto it with a system designed to kill it. From the moment that radar lock was established, Commander Keller had 45 seconds before the Book's fire control computer accumulated enough track data to generate a high-confidence intercept solution. 45 seconds to decide, maneuver, and respond. A $200 million aircraft, 9 people aboard, and the very real possibility that a single missile fired by a poorly supervised Venezuelan crew would transform a surveillance mission into the opening engagement of something far larger. This was not an accident of geography. It was the end product of a deliberate Russian strategic decision, and one of the most miscalculated ones Moscow had made in years. To understand why a Venezuelan air defense battery was pointing its fire control radar at a U.S. Navy patrol aircraft in the Caribbean, you have to understand what Russia was attempting to build in South America and why Washington could not allow it to stand. The Caribbean has functioned as an uncontested operational domain for the United States Navy for the better part of a century. Freedom of movement through those waters is not incidental to U.S. power projection in the Western Hemisphere. It is foundational to it. Counter-narcotics operations, logistics corridors, ISR coverage of South American coastal approaches, and rapid response capacity to regional contingencies all depend on the ability to operate freely in that airspace and those sea lanes. Russia understood this, which is precisely why Venezuela became useful. Moscow's objective was the creation of an anti-access bubble on America's southern doorstep, not a military alliance capable of defeating the U.S. Navy in open battle. No one in the Russian Ministry of Defense harbored that illusion, but a strategic irritant capable of complicating American operations, forcing the diversion of high-value assets away from Europe and the Pacific, and demonstrating to the rest of the world that Russian military technology could hold American platforms at risk even in their own hemisphere. The instrument chosen for this was Venezuela's Air Defense Modernization Program, underwritten by Moscow and stocked with some of Russia's most capable export-grade systems. The Book M2E, NATO designation SA-17 Grizzly, is a medium-range surface-to-air missile system with an engagement envelope reaching 45 kilometers in range and 25 kilometers in altitude. Its engagement radar can manage up to 24 simultaneous targets. Against a non-stealthy maritime patrol aircraft flying a predictable ISR profile at medium altitude, it represents a genuine lethal threat, particularly when operated by a crew under orders from personnel who may not fully appreciate or may deliberately disregard the consequences of engagement. Alongside the Book M2E, Russia had delivered the Panzer S-1 SA-22 Greyhound, a short-range combined gun and missile platform carrying 12 ready-to-fire missiles and twin 30mm autocannons capable of cycling at 5,000 rounds per minute. The Panzer was designed specifically to defeat the low-altitude precision weapons, cruise missiles, guided munitions, attack drones that the U.S. would use to suppress air defense networks in the opening phase of any strike campaign. It was the shield for the shield. The long-range layer was the S-300VM, designated SA-23 Gladiator, capable of intercepting not just aircraft but tactical ballistic missiles at ranges exceeding 200 kilometers. Layered together, long-range S-300VM providing area denial, Buk M2E handling medium-altitude threats, Panzer S-1 capping the low-altitude gap. The integrated network created an air defense architecture that, even when operated by crews whose proficiency was questionable, dramatically raised the cost of operating in Venezuelan airspace. Russian military advisors were embedded throughout the structure. Their presence alone raised the threshold for any U.S. response, introducing the risk that a strike on Venezuelan air defense infrastructure could produce Russian casualties, and a different category of problem entirely. This was the environment Commander Keller was flying in, and it was the environment the U.S. kill chain had been quietly prepared to dismantle. The P-8A Poseidon is commonly described as a maritime patrol aircraft, which is accurate but incomplete. The more precise description is a flying sensor network with a Boeing 737 airframe built around it. Its AN/APY-10 surface search radar covers ocean areas at ranges and resolutions no ship-based system can match. Its Signals Intelligence Suite, the electronic support measures package that had just identified the Buck M2E's fire control radar, does not simply detect hostile emissions. It classifies them by spectral signature, assigns them to a known system type from a continuously updated threat library, and geolocates the emitter to within a few meters of its physical position. This process is called emission-based targeting. The moment the Buck battery illuminated Commander Keller's aircraft, it did not just threaten the Poseidon. It broadcast its own precise coordinates into the P-8A's sensor suite, which processed and packaged that information and transmitted it via Link 16 to every network platform within data link range before the radar operator on the ground had finished his targeting sequence. Link 16 is the encrypted tactical data network that functions as the connective tissue of the U.S. Joint Force. It does not pass voice messages or text descriptions. It passes fire control quality data, coordinates, signatures, track histories, threat classifications, in a standardized format that every receiving platform can immediately ingest and act on without translation or interpretation. The Buck battery's position, radar signature, and operational status arrived at the Combat Information Center of the USS Arleigh Burke, DDG-51, operating over 300 nautical miles away in the same second it was generated. The destroyer's SPY-1DV phased array radar had already been maintaining a comprehensive picture of the Caribbean operational environment. Its Aegis Combat Management System absorbed the Link 16 update and calculated a targeting solution against the newly identified Buck battery in milliseconds. The response, however, was not going to be immediate. It was going to be surgical. Commander Keller executed the first phase. The P-8A broke hard, G-forces pressing the crew into their seats as the aircraft carved a turn away from the radar threat axis. Simultaneously, the countermeasure system dispensed salvos of AL-47 flares and chaff clouds, infrared decoys to confuse heat-seeking guidance systems, metallic chaff to saturate and break the Buck's radar track. The combination bought time and broke the fire control lock. The EWO's console shifted from the solid red of an active lock to the amber of a degraded track. The aircraft was no longer in the kill zone. But the Buck battery was still operational, its radar was still emitting, and those emissions were still being logged. The USS Arleigh Burke launched two SM-2 Block 3 missiles from its vertical launch system cells. These were not aimed at the Buck battery. They were aimed at the Venezuelan operator's attention, a perceived incoming air threat that would force the air defense crew to shift focus from the departing P-8A to objects now moving toward them at high speed. Every radar in the battery turned toward the SM-2S. Every operator's eyes followed. They never looked for the third platform. An MQ-9 Reaper unmanned aerial vehicle had been holding station at altitude over the Venezuelan coastal zone, its multispectral sensor suite already trained on the Buck battery site after receiving the Link 16 targeting update. The Reaper's role in this engagement was not reconnaissance. It was carrying an AGM-114R Hellfire missile, a 100-pound precision-guided weapon with a shape-charge warhead and a laser seeker that does not miss when the designator holds. The aim point was not the missile launch vehicles. It was the command vehicle. The mobile control node housing the battery's fire control computers, its communications equipment, and in all probability the Russian advisors directing the operation. The launch vehicles without their command node are metal. Expensive, sophisticated metal incapable of engaging anything without the brain that coordinates them. The Hellfire covered the distance from release to impact at Mach 1.3. Time of flight, slightly over 2 minutes. The Venezuelan operators were tracking the SM-2 decoys, running their engagement sequences, managing a threat that was never going to arrive. They had no warning indicator for an inbound weapon released from an aircraft they had never detected. Guided by a laser designator they could not see. At 0620 hours, the command vehicle was destroyed in a direct hit that triggered secondary explosions from the vehicle's own fuel and electronics. The communications architecture of the entire Buck M2E battalion collapsed simultaneously. The launch vehicles remained physically intact. Tactically, they were parked trucks. On Commander Keller's aircraft, the EWO watched the threat scope clear. The S-band fire control emissions dropped to 0, not degraded, not intermittent, gone. The electronic signature of a system whose operator was no longer alive to run it. The financial accounting for this exchange is worth examining closely. A Pantsir S, one export battalion carries a price tag in the range of $15 million. The full Buk M2E system represents hundreds of millions in Russian arms investment. Delivered on credit terms the Venezuelan economy could not service without Moscow's forbearance. The entire architecture Russia had spent years and significant diplomatic capital installing on America's southern flank was rendered combat ineffective by one Hellfire missile that cost under $150,000. That asymmetry is not accidental. It is the deliberate product of a doctrine that treats information superiority as the primary weapon and everything else as delivery hardware. Russia's strategic logic in Venezuela rested on a historically defensible assumption that sophisticated air defense systems in a client state create deterrence effects that constrain American freedom of action without requiring direct confrontation. That logic holds when the adversary's kill chain is slow enough that the air defense system gets to exist and operate long enough to generate hesitation. When the kill chain runs from sensor contact to targeting solution to weapon impact faster than a radar operator can complete his engagement sequence, the deterrence calculation inverts entirely. The air defense system does not deter, it designates. Every second the Buk M2E radar was transmitting, it was providing the precise coordinates for its own neutralization. The Venezuelan crew that locked onto Commander Keller's aircraft did not understand that they had not threatened the Poseidon. They had activated it as a sensor node in a network that was already reaching back toward them before the lock-on tone had finished sounding in the cockpit. The radar beam does not travel to its target alone. It travels in both directions, and what returns from the American side arrives faster than anything they can launch in response. For any Venezuelan operator who received orders to illuminate a US platform after that morning, the equation was permanent. The Caribbean is not held by the presence of warships or the threat of air campaigns. It is held by the certainty that the response will arrive before the decision to provoke it can be walked back. Russia built a network in Venezuela specifically designed to challenge that certainty. The challenge lasted until the first radar locked on. Knowing how quickly and completely this layered air defense architecture was dismantled, do you think Moscow recalibrates how it arms client states after an outcome like this? Or does the political pressure to maintain the strategy override what the operational evidence shows? Drop your answer in the comments below.